I was the target. I just didn't know it yet. The whole thing started on a Sunday in November. The kind of cold gray afternoon where the sky looks like old dishwater and you can smell wood smoke from 3 houses down. My daughter had invited me for Thanksgiving 2 weeks early. She said she wanted to start a new tradition. I thought that was sweet. I thought a lot of things back then that I've since had to unlearn. Her name is Sandra. She's 41 years old, and until about 14 months ago, I would have told anyone who asked that she was the best thing I ever did with my life. Her husband, my son-in-law, is a man named Troy. He sells commercial real estate in the Atlanta metro area and has the kind of handshake that's always just a little too firm, like he's reminding you he's there. I'm 67. My name is Walter. I'm a retired civil engineer. 32 years with the county, managed bridges and drainage systems, never missed a day of work I can remember. My wife, Patricia, passed 4 years ago from ovarian cancer. After she died, it was just me and the house in Marietta and Sandra calling every Sunday and Troy showing up occasionally with that handshake and that smile. I should have paid more attention to the smile. That November Sunday, I drove the 40 minutes to their place in Alpharetta. Nice house. 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, a 3-car garage. Troy had converted into what he called his home office. I'd help them with the down payment, $80,000, which I want you to understand was not a casual amount of money for me. It was a chunk of the equity I'd pulled from my own home after Patricia passed. I gave it because Sandra asked, and because Troy had a whole presentation ready on his laptop about their investment potential and 5-year plan and projected equity growth. I'm an engineer. Numbers usually make sense to me, but I trusted them more than I trusted the numbers, which turned out to be my mistake. Dinner was good. Sandra made a turkey breast and sweet potato casserole, and Troy opened a bottle of red wine he said was exceptional. Though I noticed he mostly talked about it without drinking much of it, I had 2 glasses, maybe a little more. Around 8 o'clock, I started feeling off. Not sick exactly. More like a low hum behind my eyes and a heaviness in my legs that didn't match how much I'd eaten or drunk. I excused myself and went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. The faucet water in their neighborhood always tastes a little mineral heavy, so I went to the cabinet where Sandra usually kept bottled water. The cabinet was slightly open. I don't know what made me look more carefully. Maybe it was the engineer in me. I've spent 30 years noticing when something is 2 degrees off from where it should be, but something made me reach to the back of that cabinet, behind the bottles lined up neatly in the front. And that's when my hand found something cold and hard that wasn't a water bottle. It was a small amber prescription bottle, no label, and next to it a folded piece of paper. I stood in that kitchen for probably 30 seconds without moving. The sounds of the TV in the living room, Troy laughing at something, all of it felt very far away. I unfolded the paper. It was a printout, dense text, medical terminology, but one phrase was underlined in blue pen. Accumulation in fatty tissue, consistent with prolonged low-dose exposure. I put the paper back. I put the bottle back. I walked to the bathroom, ran the cold water, and looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. Then I went back to the living room and told Sandra I had a headache and needed to head home. She hugged me at the door. Troy shook my hand. I drove myself directly to Northside Hospital, not the next morning. That night, the ER doctor, a younger woman who introduced herself as Dr. Prentice, took my symptoms and my description of what I'd found seriously enough to run a full tox panel. She admitted me for observation and told me the results would take several hours. I sat in that hospital bed with the TV off, listening to the hallway sounds, and I thought about Sandra at age 7 crying because her goldfish died. I thought about the look on her face at Patricia's funeral, or what I'd believed was grief. I turned those memories over like stones looking at what was underneath. The next morning, Dr. Prentice came back with a quiet expression that I now know means this is more serious than we hoped. There were elevated levels of thallium in my blood. Thallium is a heavy metal. It's odorless, tasteless, and it builds up slowly over time. It was once used in rat poison before being banned for consumer use in the United States decades ago. precisely because of how easy it was to slip into someone's food or drink without detection. The doctor asked me carefully whether I wanted to contact anyone or whether I wanted her to help me contact the police first. I asked for the police. What I didn't tell her, what I hadn't told anyone yet, was that 2 months earlier, my estate attorney had called me about a document that had been submitted to his office. A revised version of my will, with my signature on it. He'd flagged it because the signature didn't match the notarization records from when we had originally filed, and because the revised document rerouted the entirety of my estate, my home, my retirement accounts, a $1.1 million life insurance policy I'd held for 20 years, to Sandra and Troy jointly, cutting out the 2 charitable foundations I'd specifically included when Patricia and I had originally written the document together. My attorney, a careful man named Howard who I've worked with for 15 years, had not filed the revised document. He'd called me instead. I told him to hold on to it and say nothing. So by the time the detective from the Fulton County Sheriff's Office sat down across from me in that hospital room, I already had 2 things in my hands, a fraudulent will and a tox panel. The detective, a heavy-set man in his 50s named Harris, who looked like he'd seen everything twice, listened to me for 45 minutes without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mr. Hutchins, I want you to understand something. This is not a family matter. This is a criminal matter." Those words settled something in me. I don't know what I'd been calling it in my own head. A misunderstanding maybe, some terrible mistake. Some explanation I hadn't thought of yet, but hearing it stated plainly by a man whose job was to see things clearly helped me let go of the last thread of hope that I'd been wrong about my daughter. I had not been wrong. Over the next 3 weeks, while I stayed with my brother in Decatur and underwent chelation therapy to clear the thallium from my system, Detective Harris and a team from the Financial Crimes Unit began pulling apart Sandra and Troy's life like a knot coming undone. What they found was methodical and, in a horrible way, patient. This had not been a sudden plan born out of desperation. This had been built over time. Troy had taken out a $750,000 life insurance policy on me 18 months earlier, naming Sandra as beneficiary. He listed himself as my financial advisor on the application, a role he had absolutely no legal standing to fill, and forged my signature on the consent forms. The policy had been approved because nobody had looked closely enough at the paperwork, which is a failure of the insurance industry I'll address separately at some point. The thallium had likely been introduced into my food or drink during my visits to their home over a period of months. The toxicologist who testified later explained that at the levels found in my blood, I'd been receiving small doses, enough to cause fatigue, cognitive fog, and eventual organ damage, but slow enough that it might have looked like natural decline in a man my age. The printout I'd found in the kitchen cabinet was a dosage reference guide. Sandra had left it there, tucked behind those water bottles, because she'd needed to check it and hadn't expected me to go digging around in that particular cabinet. The amber bottle contained thallium sulfate dissolved in a saline solution. They arrested Sandra on a Wednesday afternoon at the house in Alpharetta. Troy was arrested at his office in Buckhead 40 minutes later. I know these details because Detective Harris called me personally to tell me, which I hadn't expected and which I appreciated more than I knew how to say. What came out during the investigation and then during trial was a picture of 2 people who had built a life considerably beyond their means and had quietly, methodically decided that the fastest exit from that situation ran through me. Troy's commercial real estate business had been struggling for 2 years. 3 major deals fallen through, a lawsuit from a former partner, a second mortgage on the Alpharetta house that Sandra had never mentioned to me. They were, by the time that November Sunday came around, approximately $340,000 in debt beyond their visible assets. They had made no real plan to address it. What they had made was a plan involving a prescription bottle and a forged signature, and eventually, me. The trial lasted 9 days. Sandra sat across the courtroom from me, and I watched her face for something. I'm not sure what. Remorse, maybe. Or the version of her I used to know. I didn't find either. What I saw was someone I didn't recognize, which might have been the hardest part of all of it. Not the betrayal exactly, but the blankness. like there had been a person there once, and somewhere along the way she had decided that person was less important than money. Sandra was convicted of attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and financial elder abuse, a charge that carries significant weight in Georgia, where prosecutors have become increasingly aggressive about protecting older adults from exactly this kind of targeted exploitation. Troy was convicted on the same conspiracy and attempted murder charges, plus wire fraud and insurance fraud for the forged policy. Sandra received 22 years, Troy received 26. Neither was eligible for parole for the first 15 years of their respective sentences. The judge, a woman in her 60s who delivered the sentencing in the kind of measured, deliberate tone that made every word land, said that what they had done represented a premeditated and sustained campaign against the life and dignity of a man who had given them nothing but trust and material support. She looked at them both for a long moment before she spoke again. You traded a father for a financial instrument? The court finds no mitigating circumstances. I sat in the gallery and I didn't cry. I thought I might, but I didn't. I felt something quieter. Not satisfaction exactly, more like the particular exhaustion that comes when you've been holding your breath for a very long time and you finally let it out. There are things I want you to take from this, if you're listening. The first is this. If someone you love is suddenly very interested in your estate planning, your insurance policies, your financial accounts, pay attention to that. Ask questions. Loop in your own attorney, not one they recommend. I had an attorney I trusted, and that attorney's instinct saved my life as surely as that tox panel did. The second is, if you feel sick after visiting someone, and you have any reason at all, to suspect something isn't right, you go to the emergency room. You don't wait until morning. You don't talk yourself out of it. You go. Some poisons do their worst work in the first hours. I was fortunate. Don't count on being fortunate. The third thing is harder to say. Some of you listening to this have children you supported beyond what was reasonable, and I'm not judging that. I did it too. But there is a difference between helping someone stand up and doing all the standing for them. Patricia and I talked about this once, years before she got sick, and she said something I've thought about a lot since. We're not doing them any favors if they never have to figure out how to carry their own weight. She was right. She was usually right about the things that mattered. The $80,000 I'd given them toward the down payment on that house was gone, of course. Part of the legal proceedings included an attempt to recover it, but by that point it had been folded into the debt structure of their various obligations, and there was very little left to find. I've made peace with that. Money can be remade. Time cannot, and I had time. After the trial, I did something Patricia had always wanted us to do and that we'd kept putting off. I took a 3-week trip to Ireland, the southwest coast, the Dingle Peninsula, places I'd only ever seen in photographs. I walked along cliffs with the Atlantic wind coming in hard off the water, and I ate in small restaurants where nobody knew anything about me, and I called my brother every other evening to tell him I was fine. I came home to my house in Marietta, which is paid off and sits exactly the way Patricia and I arranged it, with the roses she planted along the back fence still coming up every spring. I updated my will, properly this time, with Howard present and a notary I selected independently. And I divided my estate between 2 organizations, a hospice network that took care of Patricia in her final weeks with a gentleness I will never forget, and a scholarship fund at the State University where I got my engineering degree 50 years ago. Nothing goes to Sandra. Not because I am angry, though I was, for a long time, but because what I give is an extension of who I am and what I believe, and I have to give it honestly. Giving to someone who tried to take my life would not be honest. It would be something else entirely, habit maybe, or the ghost of a relationship that turned out to be something other than what I believed it was. I am 67 years old. I have my house, my health, my brother, a handful of friends who showed up for me in ways I didn't expect during the worst of this. I have Patricia's roses in the backyard. I have enough. And I have this. The knowledge that when it mattered most, I walked into that kitchen and I paid attention. I saw what was there. I didn't explain it away or talk myself out of it or decide it was better not to know. That is the thing I'm most grateful for. Not that I survived, but that I didn't look away. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Standing in Sandra's kitchen, my hand touching that cold amber bottle in the dark of the cabinet, the TV murmuring in the other room, Troy laughing at something. That moment didn't feel dramatic. It felt quiet and ordinary and completely wrong, the way a step feels when you expect solid floor and find nothing there. I've thought a lot about why things went the way they did. Not in the sense of blame, though there's plenty of that to go around. More in the sense of cause and effect, the long chain of small choices that led two people to believe they could end a life and walk away clean. Sandra and Troy didn't arrive at that plan overnight. They built it slowly, the way you build anything that's meant to last. Decision by decision, compromise by compromise, until the thing they'd constructed was so familiar to them that it probably didn't feel monstrous anymore. It probably just felt like a solution. That's what happens when a person lets go of their integrity in small enough increments. You don't notice the distance you've traveled until you look back and can't see where you started. Troy spent 2 years watching his business collapse and never once, as far as I can tell, sat down and said, "I need to work harder, spend less, ask for help." He looked for a shortcut. Sandra, my daughter, the person I raised, looked at the same problem and agreed. That's not a failure of intelligence. That's a failure of character, and it's the kind of failure that compounds. What saved me wasn't luck. The luck was part of it. What saved me was paying attention. The particular habit of mind that 32 years of engineering work had built into me without my fully realizing it. Engineers don't assume. We verify. We notice when something is 2 degrees off from where it should be. I noticed the cabinet. I noticed the bottle. I didn't talk myself out of what I was seeing because it was uncomfortable. And I didn't wait until morning to act on it. That instinct, the willingness to look clearly at a hard thing and then do something about what you see, is something I'd spent a lifetime developing. It turned out to matter more than I ever expected. The other thing that saved me was Howard, a careful, unhurried man who'd known me for 15 years. Who looked at a forged signature and called me instead of filing the document. That kind of integrity, the kind that costs something, that requires you to slow down and do the harder thing, is rarer than it should be. I'm grateful for it every day. What I want to say to anyone who's been sitting with this story is, you don't get through the hard things by accident. You get through them because you've been building something in yourself, quietly, over a long time. The kind of person who doesn't look away, who does the right thing even when it's inconvenient, who keeps going when the ground falls out. That's not inspiration. That's just what it takes. I'm 67 years old. I went to Ireland. I came home to Patricia's roses. I still have enough. And I paid attention when it mattered. That's the thing I'll carry.